In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the face of the deep. Then God spoke and said, "Let there be light," and there was light. With that single command, creation began to unfold. God separated light from darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. He formed the sky above and the waters below, gathered the seas together, and made dry land appear. He caused the land to bring forth grass, trees, and fruit, each bearing seed according to its kind. On the fourth day, God placed the sun, the moon, and the stars in the heavens to give light to the earth and to mark seasons, days, and years. He filled the waters with fish and the skies with birds. Then he created every living creature that moves upon the land. Finally, God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The man became a living being. From him, God made woman, a companion and equal, and together they were placed in authority over all creation. When God looked upon all that he had made, he saw that it was very good. On the seventh day, he rested, blessing that day as sacred. The God of Israel, called Yahweh, was seen as the one true creator, unlike the many gods worshipped in other ancient cultures. While other peoples imagined their gods as born from chaos and conflict, the Hebrew understanding revealed a single divine will that brought order and life with purpose. Yahweh existed before all things, speaking creation into existence through power and intention. Early Hebrew cosmology saw the universe as a structured world with heaven above, earth in the center, and the deep below, all under the rule of one eternal God. God planted a garden in a place called Eden, a paradise filled with rivers, fruit-bearing trees, and peace. In the center of this garden grew the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God placed Adam and Eve there to live freely and to care for the garden. They walked with God in harmony and had everything they needed. Only one command was given. They were not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for if they did, they would surely die. But the serpent, cunning and deceitful, came to Eve and questioned God's word. He promised that by eating the fruit, they would become wise and be like God, knowing good and evil. Tempted by his words, Eve took the fruit and ate it. She gave some to Adam, and he also ate. Then their eyes were opened. They realized they were naked and hid themselves among the trees. When God called for them, they were afraid. Sin had entered the world, and innocence was lost. God judged their disobedience. The serpent was cursed to crawl on its belly. The woman was told that pain would accompany childbirth, and the man would toil and labor for his food. They were sent out of Eden so they could no longer eat from the tree of life and live forever. Yet, even in their punishment, God showed mercy. He made garments for them and clothed them before sending them away. Outside the garden, Adam and Eve began a new life filled with struggle, work, and sorrow. But their story was also one of hope. Though they had fallen, God did not abandon them. From this beginning came the story of all humanity, a story of sin and redemption, of separation and divine promise. The first chapter of creation and the fall set the stage for everything that would follow: the long history of God's people and his plan to bring them back to himself. As generations passed after Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, humanity multiplied and spread across the earth. But with time, the world began to change. The harmony that once existed between people and their Creator faded. Violence and corruption filled the earth. The purity of creation was replaced by greed, cruelty, and disregard for what was good. According to the book of Genesis, the thoughts of human hearts had become continually evil. The world that had been made perfect now stood in moral ruin. Among the growing wickedness, one man stood apart. His name was Noah. He was described as righteous and faithful, a man who lived in obedience to God while the rest of humanity turned away. Seeing the deep corruption of the world, God resolved to cleanse the earth and begin anew. It would not be an act of cruelty, but one of renewal. Life would not be destroyed forever, but reborn through a single family and the creatures that would be saved with them. Noah was instructed to build an ark, a massive vessel large enough to carry his family and representatives of every living species. The structure was to be built of wood and sealed to withstand the coming floodwaters. Noah followed every instruction carefully. His work became a symbol of both judgment and hope. The people around him did not believe that a flood was coming, yet he continued to build, guided by faith rather than sight. When the ark was completed, Noah brought aboard his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. Pairs of animals, both clean and unclean, were gathered and placed within the vessel. Then the rains began. Water poured from the sky, and fountains burst from the deep beneath the earth. The floodwaters rose, covering fields, trees, and mountains. The world that had once been filled with life was now silent beneath the waves. For 40 days, the rain fell without rest. The waters covered everything, erasing the corruption that had consumed the earth. Only the ark remained afloat, carrying the seeds of life through the vast and endless sea. When the rain finally stopped, the water lingered for many months before it began to recede. At last, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a raven which flew back and forth until the waters dried. Later, he released a dove, but it found no place to land and returned to the ark. After 7 days, he sent the dove again, and it came back with an olive leaf in its beak, a sign that the earth was beginning to live again. When the dove did not return after the 3rd time, Noah knew that the land was ready. Noah opened the ark, and all living creatures stepped onto dry ground once more. The air was fresh, and the world stood quiet beneath the sun. Noah built an altar and offered a sacrifice of thanks. The Creator promised that never again would a flood destroy all life on earth. As a sign of this covenant, a rainbow appeared in the sky, a reminder of mercy and renewal after judgment. The story of Noah's flood is not only about destruction, but about rebirth. It marks the end of an age of corruption and the beginning of a new world. Humanity would continue, yet the story serves as a warning that moral decay leads to ruin, and that faith and righteousness can bring salvation even in the darkest times. The Hebrew account of the flood also shares similarities with other ancient traditions, particularly those of Mesopotamia. Civilizations like the Sumerians and Babylonians told stories of great floods that once swept the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known texts, describes a man named Utnapishtim who was warned by the gods to build a large boat to survive a divine flood. Like Noah, he saved his family and animals, released birds to test the waters, and came to rest on a mountain after the storm. Yet, the Hebrew version carries a very different message. In the Mesopotamian myths, the flood is often the result of angry gods disturbed by human noise or rebellion. In Genesis, the flood is not a whim of divine anger, but a moral act of justice and renewal. The God of the Hebrews is not unpredictable or cruel. He is a righteous judge who brings punishment for evil, but also provides a path for survival and new life. The Great Flood stands as one of the defining stories of the Old Testament. It reveals the depth of human failure, the justice of divine judgment, and the mercy that follows through Noah and his family. The story teaches that faith, obedience, and trust in God can preserve life even when the world around it collapses. After the Great Flood, the world began anew. The descendants of Noah multiplied and filled the earth, building settlements across fertile valleys and river plains. Humanity shared one language, which allowed them to communicate and work together with ease. For a time, this unity brought progress and stability as people advanced in craftsmanship, trade, and the building of cities. Yet within this unity, human pride began to grow. The land of Shinar, located in the region of ancient Mesopotamia, the people decided to create a great city that would stand as a symbol of their strength and permanence. At its center, they planned a monumental tower that would rise high into the heavens, a structure that would mark their greatness and secure their place in history. The project became the ultimate expression of human ambition. It reflected not the desire to honor God, but the determination to elevate humanity above divine authority. The construction of the tower demonstrated cooperation and innovation, yet it was fueled by self-glorification rather than humility. As the work continued, the people labored tirelessly, shaping and burning bricks, stacking them layer by layer toward the sky. Dust filled the air, and the sound of tools echoed across the plains. The tower became a symbol of what humanity could achieve when united in purpose. But in their pursuit of greatness, they had forgotten the source of their existence. The unity that once reflected divine harmony had turned into a symbol of collective arrogance. According to the biblical account, God observed the growing pride of humankind and intervened in a way that would reshape the course of human history. Rather than bringing destruction, he introduced confusion. The single language that bound humanity together was divided into many tongues. Workers who once understood each other suddenly spoke words that others could not comprehend. Confusion spread across the city, halting construction and dissolving cooperation. The great tower stood unfinished, and the once unified people began to scatter in every direction. This event became known as the Tower of Babel, a turning point that marked the beginning of human diversity. From this moment forward, nations began to form, each with its own language, culture, and identity. What was once a single people became a mosaic of societies spread across the earth. The confusion of languages was both a limitation and a gift. It ended humanity's attempt to defy divine order, yet it also set the stage for the creation of nations and the growth of civilization. The story of Babel serves as a reminder that human ambition without humility leads to downfall. While divine intervention can bring order and new beginnings out of chaos, from the ruins of Babel emerged the foundations of the world's cultures, each distinct but connected by a shared origin. From a biblical perspective, the early civilizations that follow this event were the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, whose families spread across different regions of the ancient world. The book of Genesis records these divisions in what is known as the Table of Nations, a record of the earliest peoples and their migrations. As humanity dispersed, they established new societies, developed languages, and adapted to diverse lands. The river valleys of Mesopotamia, the fertile plains of Egypt, and the coastal regions of the Mediterranean became centers of human activity. Agriculture flourished, trade expanded, and systems of governance began to form. Archaeological discoveries from these regions reveal some of the world's first cities, temples, and written records, which align with the biblical view of humanity's early expansion after Babel. The story of the Tower of Babel explains both the unity and fragmentation of the human race. It reveals how pride can divide, yet how divine purpose can transform division into creation. From a single act of confusion came the birth of nations, languages, and cultures that would shape human history. The scattering of people across the earth fulfilled the divine plan that humanity should inhabit all corners of the world. Though separated by language and distance, all nations remained connected through their shared origin and their continuing search for meaning under the same heavens. After the nations were scattered from Babel, new civilizations began to grow across the ancient world. Among them lived a man named Abraham, whose story marked a turning point in human history. From this moment, the story of the Old Testament shifted from the whole of humanity to one man and his descendants. Through Abraham, the idea of a chosen people and a divine promise was born. Abraham, first known as Abram, lived in the city of Ur, a wealthy center of trade and worship in Mesopotamia. The world of his time was filled with idols and gods made by human hands. In that world of many beliefs, Abraham was called by one true God. He was told to leave his homeland, his relatives, and all that was familiar, and to journey to a new land that would one day belong to his descendants. Trusting in what he could not see, Abraham obeyed. He set out with his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all who were with him, traveling toward the land of Canaan. When Abraham reached Canaan, he was told that his descendants would inherit the land. This promise became the beginning of the covenant between God and Abraham. The covenant was a sacred agreement that would shape all that followed. God promised that Abraham would become the father of many nations, and that his descendants would be as countless as the stars in the sky. Through his line, all the families of the earth would be blessed. As a sign of this everlasting covenant, Abraham's name was changed from Abram to Abraham, meaning father of many. His wife's name was changed from Sarai to Sarah. The covenant also introduced a symbol of belonging, circumcision, a lasting sign that Abraham's descendants were bound to God in faith and obedience. This moment marked the beginning of the Hebrew people, chosen not for privilege, but for purpose. They were to be a people of faith, living in trust and righteousness, showing the world what it meant to walk with the Creator. Years passed, and Abraham and Sarah remained without a child. The promise seemed impossible. Yet in their old age, Sarah gave birth to a son named Isaac. His birth was seen as a miracle and a sign that the covenant would continue. Isaac grew to become the link between Abraham and the generations to follow. His life, like his father's, was marked by faith and obedience. Abraham's faith was tested in a moment that would define his legacy. He was told to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. It was a test of trust beyond understanding. Abraham prepared to do what was asked of him, believing that God had a purpose he could not yet see. At the last moment, the sacrifice was stopped, and another offering was provided in Isaac's place. The test proved Abraham's faith and showed that his devotion was complete. Isaac later married Rebekah, and they became the parents of twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Although Esau was the firstborn, the blessing of the covenant passed to Jacob. His life was one of struggle and change. In his early years, Jacob acted with cunning and ambition, but through hardship and time, he grew into a man of faith. One night, he wrestled with a divine being until daybreak and was given a new name, Israel, meaning he who struggles with God. Jacob's 12 sons became the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. Through them, the covenant promise continued, growing from one family into a nation. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob became the foundation of the Hebrew faith, showing the power of trust, endurance, and divine purpose. The story of Abraham and the covenant marks the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between God and humanity. The Creator who had once dealt with all the earth now chose to work through one man and his descendants to bring faith, order, and blessing back into the world. The lives of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob stand as enduring examples of belief and commitment to the divine promise that shaped the destiny of Israel. Among the 12 sons of Jacob, one would rise above the rest to play a vital role in shaping the destiny of his people. His name was Joseph. His story, filled with hardship, betrayal, and redemption, became one of the most powerful accounts of faith and divine providence in the Old Testament. Joseph was the son of Jacob and Rachel, and he was dearly loved by his father. This affection caused jealousy among his brothers, who saw him as favored and arrogant. Their resentment deepened when Joseph began to share dreams that seemed to place him above them. In one dream, the sheaves of his brothers bowed before his own. In another, the sun, moon, and stars bowed to him. These visions suggested that Joseph would one day rule over his family, and his brothers' envy turned into hatred. One day, when they were far from home tending their flocks, the brothers plotted against him. They threw him into a dry pit and later sold him to a caravan of traders traveling to Egypt. They then dipped his coat in animal blood and brought it to their father, leading Jacob to believe that his beloved son had been killed by a wild beast. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold as a servant in the household of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Though he was a slave, Joseph's wisdom and integrity soon made him stand out. He gained responsibility and trust, managing his master's household with success. But false accusations from Potiphar's wife led to his imprisonment. Even in the darkness of the prison, Joseph remained faithful and continued to trust in God. While in prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's servants, the cupbearer and the baker. His interpretations proved true, and years later, when Pharaoh himself was troubled by strange dreams, the cupbearer remembered Joseph and spoke of him. Pharaoh summoned Joseph and described his dreams of 7 fat cows consumed by 7 thin ones, and of healthy grain swallowed by withered stalks. Joseph explained that the dreams foretold 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. He advised Pharaoh to store grain during the years of plenty to prepare for the years of scarcity. Impressed by his wisdom, Pharaoh appointed Joseph as his second in command, placing him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. From slavery and imprisonment, Joseph had risen to power guided by divine purpose. As Joseph predicted, the years of abundance came, followed by a severe famine that spread across the surrounding regions. People from distant lands came to Egypt to buy grain. Among them were Joseph's brothers, who arrived seeking food, not knowing that the powerful Egyptian ruler before them was the brother they had once betrayed. Joseph recognized them immediately, but did not reveal his identity at first. He tested their honesty and character, wanting to see if they had changed. Through a series of encounters, he saw humility and remorse in them, especially in Judah, who offered himself in place of their youngest brother, Benjamin. Moved by emotion, Joseph finally revealed who he was. His brothers were struck with fear, expecting punishment, but Joseph forgave them, saying that what they had meant for harm, God had turned into good. He invited his entire family to come to Egypt, where they would live safely during the famine. Jacob, now an old man, traveled with all his household and was reunited with his son after many years of mourning. The family settled in the land of Goshen, a fertile region in Egypt, where they prospered and grew in number. The story of Joseph marks the transition of the Hebrew people from a family of shepherds in Canaan to a growing community in a foreign land. Their migration to Egypt was not a coincidence, but part of a larger plan that would unfold over generations. What began as betrayal and loss became the foundation for survival and future deliverance. Joseph's life revealed that even in suffering, divine purpose can be at work. Through wisdom, patience, and forgiveness, he preserved both his family and the promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Israelites' presence in Egypt would one day lead to their enslavement, but it would also prepare the way for the next great chapter of their story, the rise of Moses and the deliverance of a nation. Generations passed after Joseph's death, and the Israelites who had once lived peacefully in Egypt began to multiply and grow in number. Their prosperity and strength caused fear among Egypt's rulers. A new pharaoh, who no longer remembered Joseph's service to Egypt, saw the Israelites as a threat to his kingdom. To control them, he forced them into slavery, making them build cities and work under harsh conditions. The life of the Israelites became one of suffering and oppression. Despite their hardships, the Israelites continued to grow. Fearing their strength, Pharaoh ordered that every newborn Hebrew boy be killed. In this time of cruelty, a child was born who would one day lead his people to freedom. His name was Moses. Moses' mother hid him for 3 months and then placed him in a basket coated with tar and set it afloat on the Nile River. The basket was discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, who took pity on the baby and raised him as her own son within the royal palace. Though he grew up surrounded by wealth and power, Moses never forgot his true identity. One day he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and moved by anger and compassion, struck the Egyptian dead. Fearing punishment, Moses fled Egypt and settled in the land of Midian. There he married, worked as a shepherd, and lived in peace for many years. But his life changed when he encountered a burning bush that was not consumed by its flames. From the midst of the fire, the voice of God called him to return to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of bondage. Moses was hesitant, feeling unworthy and unsure, but he was assured that God would be with him. Accompanied by his brother Aaron, he returned to confront Pharaoh with a message that would change history: the demand to let God's people go. Pharaoh refused, and Egypt was struck by a series of plagues that revealed the power of the God of Israel over all the gods of Egypt. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs covered the land. Insects and disease destroyed crops and livestock, and darkness fell over the country. Yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. The final plague would break his resistance. Every firstborn in Egypt would die, from the palace to the poorest home. Before the last plague, the Israelites were instructed to mark their doors with the blood of a lamb, so that the angel of death would pass over their homes. That night, the firstborn of Egypt died, and the cries of sorrow filled the land. Pharaoh finally gave in and ordered the Israelites to leave. In great haste, they departed, beginning the long journey toward freedom. This event became known as the Exodus. As they fled, Pharaoh's army pursued them to the edge of the Red Sea. Trapped between the waters and their enemies, the Israelites seemed doomed. Then the sea parted, opening a path through the waves. The Israelites crossed on dry ground, and when the Egyptians followed, the waters returned, sweeping away the pursuing army. The people of Israel were free at last. Their journey through the wilderness was long and difficult. They faced hunger, thirst, and doubt, but they were guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. In the desert of Sinai, the Israelites gathered at the foot of a mountain where God revealed himself once more. There, through Moses, the people received the 10 Commandments, the foundation of divine law. These laws established the moral and spiritual principles that would shape the identity of Israel as a nation. The commandments called for loyalty to God, respect for life, truth, family, and justice. They were not just rules, but the framework of a covenant between God and his people. In giving the law, God formed a community that would live according to his will, distinct from the nations around them. The story of Moses and the Exodus became the defining moment in Israel's history. It transformed a nation of slaves into a people bound by faith, law, and purpose. The God who delivered them from Egypt was not distant, but present, guiding them toward a promised land where the covenant with Abraham would continue to unfold through generations. After escaping from Egypt, the Israelites entered a vast and unforgiving wilderness. For 40 years, they wandered through deserts and rocky lands, guided by faith and by the leadership of Moses. The journey was not only physical, but spiritual, transforming them from a group of refugees into a nation bound by covenant. Life in the wilderness was harsh. Food was scarce, water even scarcer, and the people often questioned whether freedom had been worth the suffering. Yet, in the middle of the desert, miracles sustained them. According to the book of Exodus, manna appeared like dew upon the ground each morning, and quail filled the skies when hunger struck. When the people cried out for water, Moses struck a rock at Horeb, and water flowed from the stone. Even so, faith did not come easily. Many grew restless and longed to return to Egypt, where life, though cruel, was at least familiar. Their constant doubt brought judgment. God declared that this generation would never enter the promised land, only their children would see it. The 40 years of wandering became a time of testing, a period in which the people were taught obedience, patience, and trust. During these years, the Israelites received the law at Mount Sinai. The 10 Commandments became the foundation of their identity and moral order. The Ark of the Covenant, crafted under divine instruction, became the symbol of God's presence among them. Wherever the ark went, the people followed, carrying their faith through the endless sands. When Moses' life came to an end, leadership passed to Joshua, his loyal and steadfast assistant. Joshua was a man of courage and discipline, chosen to complete the mission that Moses had begun. His task was to lead the new generation into the land of Canaan, the land that had been promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The crossing of the Jordan River marked a moment of destiny. Just as the Red Sea had parted for Moses, the waters of the Jordan parted for Joshua and his people. They stepped into Canaan, carrying the ark before them, a living sign that the divine promise was being fulfilled. Their first great challenge was the city of Jericho. Its walls were high and strong, appearing impossible to breach. But Joshua followed the command given to him. For 6 days, the Israelites marched around the city in silence, while priests blew their trumpets. On the 7th day, the people shouted with one voice, and the walls of Jericho collapsed. The victory at Jericho became one of the most enduring symbols of faith, discipline, and obedience. After Jericho, the conquest continued. City after city fell as the Israelites claimed the land that had been foretold. The tribes of Israel divided the territory among themselves, establishing new boundaries and settlements. Yet, these victories were more than military triumphs. They represented the fulfillment of a covenant that had begun centuries before. The conquest of Canaan also carried a message of responsibility. The promised land was not a gift without condition. It was a trust dependent on their people's faithfulness to the laws that they had received. The covenant was clear. Their prosperity and peace would last only as long as they remained devoted to their God and to the moral order that defined them. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites entered a long and difficult period in their history. Without a central leader to unite them, the 12 tribes of Israel became a loose collection of communities scattered across the land of Canaan. Each tribe lived independently, governed by its own elders and traditions. There was no national government, no permanent army, and no single ruler to maintain order or guide the people in faith. This era is known as the time of the Judges, and it reveals how the Israelites struggled to survive both politically and spiritually in a land surrounded by stronger nations and competing beliefs. The book of Judges describes a repeating pattern that defined this period. The Israelites would turn away from God and begin worshiping the idols of neighboring peoples. As a result, they would lose divine protection and fall under the control of foreign enemies. In their suffering, they would cry out to God for help. God would then raise a leader known as a judge to deliver them from their oppressors. Once peace returned, the people would once again drift into disobedience, and the same cycle would begin anew. This pattern of sin, oppression, repentance, and deliverance repeated itself many times over several generations. It shows how the Israelites struggled to remain faithful to their covenant with God in a world that constantly tempted them with other beliefs and customs. The judges were not kings in the political sense, but they acted as temporary leaders, military commanders, and at times prophets. Each one rose to power during a crisis, and then faded from prominence once peace was restored. Among the many figures who appeared during this era, 3 stand out: Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. Deborah was one of the most remarkable leaders of her time. She was both a prophetess and a judge, which made her one of the few women in the Hebrew scriptures to hold authority over Israel. During her leadership, the Israelites were oppressed by King Jabin of Canaan and his general Sisera. Deborah summoned a warrior named Barak and urged him to lead an army against the Canaanites. With her guidance and courage, the Israelites won a decisive victory. Deborah's story stands out as an example of wisdom, faith, and leadership in a period when the nation was often divided and uncertain. Gideon came from the tribe of Manasseh during a time when Israel was suffering under the Midianites, who raided their land and destroyed their crops. Gideon at first doubted his ability to lead and even questioned whether God was truly with Israel. He asked for multiple signs to confirm his calling, showing his deep uncertainty and humility. Despite his doubts, Gideon gathered a small army and by divine instruction reduced it to only 300 men. With this small group, he defeated a vast Midianite force. His story became a symbol of how faith and obedience could overcome impossible odds. Yet, after Gideon's death, the Israelites again turned to idolatry, showing how fragile their faith remained. Samson is perhaps the most well-known of the judges, remembered for his incredible physical strength. His life, however, was marked by personal conflict and moral weakness. He was born under a Nazirite vow, meaning he was set apart for God from birth and forbidden to cut his hair or drink wine. His strength was a gift connected to this vow. Samson fought against the Philistines, who were one of Israel's most powerful enemies. But he was often driven by personal anger and revenge rather than wisdom. His relationship with Delilah led to his downfall when she betrayed him to the Philistines. In his final act, blinded and imprisoned, Samson prayed for one last burst of strength and pulled down the pillars of a Philistine temple, killing both himself and many of his enemies. His life reflects both the potential and the weakness of human nature, and how even flawed individuals can fulfill a divine purpose. The period of the Judges was a time of constant struggle for identity, faith, and unity. The final verse of the book of Judges captures the essence of this era. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This statement reveals both the freedom and the disorder that defined early Israelite society. It also sets the stage for what would come next, the rise of kingship and the establishment of a monarchy that would change the course of Israel forever. After generations of instability, the tribes of Israel longed for unity and strength. At the center of this transformation stood the prophet Samuel. He was both a priest and a judge, a bridge between the age of divine guidance through prophets and the coming of human kingship. The people came to Samuel with a clear request: appoint for us a king to lead us. Samuel was troubled, believing that by asking for a king, the Israelites were rejecting God's direct rule over them. Yet, after prayer, God instructed Samuel to give the people what they desired, warning that a king would bring both unity and burden. Samuel then met Saul, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was tall, strong, and humble. In a quiet ceremony, Samuel anointed Saul with oil, declaring that God had chosen him as Israel's first king. Under Saul, Israel achieved some measure of unity and military success, particularly against the Ammonites and the Philistines. Yet Saul's reign was also marked by disobedience and insecurity. His failure to follow God's commands led to his rejection as king, and Samuel was sent once more to find another leader. That new leader was David, the youngest son of Jesse from Bethlehem. David's story began in simplicity as a shepherd known for his courage and skill with the harp. His rise to prominence came when he faced Goliath, the Philistine giant who had terrified Israel's army. With only a sling and a stone, David defeated Goliath, demonstrating both faith and divine favor. David's early life was filled with tension. After Saul's death in battle, David was accepted as king, first over Judah and later over all Israel. He established Jerusalem as his capital, uniting the tribes under one banner. The Ark of the Covenant was brought to the city, turning Jerusalem into both the political and spiritual center of the nation. David expanded Israel's borders, defeated its enemies, and laid the foundations for lasting stability. Yet, David's reign was not free from personal tragedy. His moral failings cast shadows over his later years, but he remained a figure of deep faith and repentance. His Psalms, preserved in the Hebrew Scriptures, reveal a man who sought forgiveness and devoted his life to God's will. When David grew old, the throne passed to his son Solomon, who would complete what his father began. Solomon's reign marked the peak of Israel's power, wealth, and influence. He was known for his wisdom, a gift he humbly asked for to govern his people. The greatest achievement of Solomon's reign was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent structure became the permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant and the center of Israelite worship. Under Solomon, Israel reached its height of peace and unity. Trade routes flourished, foreign alliances grew, and the arts and architecture prospered. Yet, the Bible also records that Solomon's wealth and political marriages eventually led him away from the faith of his father, introducing foreign gods into Israel's life. This spiritual decline would plant the seeds of division that appeared after his death. After the death of King Solomon, the once unified kingdom of Israel entered a period of deep political and spiritual division. Solomon's heavy taxation and forced labor had created discontent. When Solomon's son, Rehoboam, took the throne, the people hoped he would ease their burdens. Instead, he declared that he would make their yoke even heavier. In response, the northern tribes broke away and chose their own ruler, Jeroboam. This event marked the great division of the kingdom. The northern tribes formed the kingdom of Israel, with its capital eventually established in Samaria. The southern tribes, mainly Judah and Benjamin, remained loyal to the house of David, forming the kingdom of Judah with Jerusalem as its capital. In the north, King Jeroboam feared that his people would return to Jerusalem to worship. So he built new altars with golden calves, leading Israel into idolatry. During this time of moral and political chaos, the prophets rose as voices of conscience. Elijah appeared during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who had introduced the worship of Baal. Elijah confronted them directly, and in a dramatic moment on Mount Carmel, fire came down from heaven to consume his sacrifice, proving that the Lord alone was God. Elijah's life ended with him being taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire. His disciple Elisha continued the work with courage and compassion, performing miracles that demonstrated God's power. A century later in the kingdom of Judah, another great prophet arose, Isaiah. He lived during a time when Assyria threatened both Israel and Judah. Isaiah's message combined warning with hope, condemning hypocrisy while foretelling the coming of a righteous king from the line of David, who would bring salvation to all nations. The divided kingdom endured for 2 centuries, but its foundations were weak. The northern kingdom of Israel eventually fell to the Assyrian Empire in 722 BCE. Its people scattered and lost to history. The southern kingdom of Judah survived longer, sustained by a few faithful kings, but it too would face destruction. The story reached a sorrowful moment with the Babylonian captivity. In 586 BCE, Jerusalem was besieged and destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar II. The Temple of Solomon was burned, and the survivors were taken away in chains to Babylon. This exile was a time of despair, but also transformation. For the first time, the Jewish people were separated from their land and temple. Yet, faith endured. They began to worship in small communities, marking the beginnings of the synagogue. The Torah took on a greater role as the foundation of spiritual life. Prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel brought messages of hope. Jeremiah promised that God would bring them back after 70 years and spoke of a new covenant written on the hearts of the faithful. Ezekiel saw a vision of a valley of dry bones coming to life, symbolizing the rebirth of Israel. Shutterstock, explorer. When Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon, he allowed the Jewish exiles to return. Many chose to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. The temple was reconstructed and worship was restored. Leaders like Ezra and Nehemiah guided the spiritual and social rebuilding. Ezra restored the authority of the law, while Nehemiah organized the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. Together, they led a reformation that restored faith, law, and identity. The people renewed their covenant with God, vowing to live according to his commandments. The story of the Old Testament stretches from the creation of the world to this restoration. It is a record of the covenant between God and humanity, a story of covenant, sin, and redemption. Though humanity's tendency to rebel is constant, the thread of mercy is always present. The Old Testament laid the foundation for Judaism and deeply shaped Western civilization, influencing ideas about justice, morality, and human dignity. From Genesis to the return from exile, it tells a single continuous story of humanity's relationship with God. It reminds every generation that even in failure and exile, there is always the possibility of restoration. The covenant may be tested, but it is never broken. Through its timeless themes of faith, repentance, and redemption, the Old Testament remains one of the greatest spiritual foundations of the world, a testament to the enduring bond between the Creator and His creation.